Selangor Dredging Berhad was first started in 1962 by Mr. Teh Kianto when he incorporated Selangor Dredging Limited. Within 2 years of their incorporation, the company had changed the name to Selangor Dredging Berhad, open listing on the main board of the Kuala Lumpur Stock Exchange. SDB's sole business was tin mining for over 2 decades, and it has been the first Malaysian company to construct and operate a dredge. During that time, SDB operates 2 dredges located in Dengkil, Selangor. In 1971, the largest and most advanced dredge in the world was constructed by SDB. Selangor Dredging Berhad started to put in motion a plan for diversification in 1980s. This has led the company to involve in various activities such as hardware manufacturing and retail manufacturing of tire rims. Wisma Selangor Dredging was the company's first property and was completed in 1985. Later, in 1997, SDB's hotel property was completed. After a period of consolidation which completed in 2004, SDB is now a company engaged in property leasing, investment holding, and provision of management services. The company's segment include property investment and development, which it involves in letting of commercial properties and the development. Other than that is the hotel operations, which engage in the operation of hotel and related services. Management services, which is engaged in the provision of management and property support services. SDB brand promise is driving excellence, building lifelong relationship. Sum up what they strive to do. The term driving excellence is in referring to products and services to build a lifelong relationship with purchasers, hotel guests, tenants, and all their stakeholders. Next, I will proceed with the 4 core value practiced by SDB. The first one is the value of passionate. SDB are passionate and determined to excel and are committed to lifelong learning. SDB also practicing the value of innovative, where they want to be forward-looking and always looking for ways to be more relevant. Furthermore, in line with good business practices, SDB are also a result-oriented and work according to strategy to reach corporate and personal goals. Lastly, the most of all is the value of caring and respectful towards their stakeholders, the people, and the environment around them. Liquidity ratios measure a company's ability to pay debt obligation and its margin of safety through the calculation of metrics including the current ratio, quick ratio, and operating cash flow ratio. The current ratio is a liquidity and efficiency ratio that measures a firm's ability to pay off its short-term liabilities with its current asset. The current ratio is an important measure of liquidity because short-term liabilities are due within the next year. Current assets like cash, cash equivalents, and marketable securities can easily be converted into cash in the short term. We can see SDB's current ratio in 2019 is higher compared to 2020. Current ratio in 2019 is Rm 1 ringgit and 34 cent, while in 2020 it has been decreased to Rm 1 ringgit and 12 cent current asset for every 1 ringgit current liabilities. Therefore, both years they still manage to pay the debt. The next one will be the acid test, or also known as quick ratio or liquid ratio. It is measure the ability of a company to use its near cash or quick asset to extinguish or retire its current liabilities immediately. Quick assets include those current assets that presumably can be quickly converted to cash at close to their book values. SDB's quick ratio in 2019 is higher compared to 2020. Quick ratio in 2019 is 49 cents, while in 2020 it has been decreased to 39 cents, which current asset for every 1 ringgit current liability and for both years, SDB does not able to pay their debt. The last element under liquidity ratio is cash ratio or cash coverage ratio. It's a liquidity ratio that measures a firm's ability to pay off its current liabilities with only cash and cash equivalent. The cash ratio is much more restrictive than the current ratio or quick ratio because no other current asset can be used to pay off current debt. SGB's cash ratio in 2020 is higher compared to 2019. Cash ratio in 2020 is 9 cents while in 2019 it was 3 cents, which it shows an increasing in the current asset for every 1 ringgit of current liability. Unfortunately, even though they are an increasing, but yet they still cannot afford to pay for the debt.
Hi, now we're moving on to the next ratio, which is activity ratio. So basically this ratio is used to measure the ability of a business in utilize the assets and liabilities to generate sales. So there are 5 elements under this ratio, which are inventory turnover, average collection periods, total asset turnover, receivable turnover, and fixed asset turnover. Alright, so now we're moving on to the first ratio. So the first ratio is inventory turnover. Inventory turnover is a financial ratio showing how many times a company has sold and replaced its inventory during its accounting period. So the formula for this ratio is cost of goods sold divided by inventory. So, from the above figure, we can see Selangor Dredging Berhad's of inventory turnover in 2019 shows that the company replaced its inventory for 45 times, while in 2020, the company replaced its inventory for 52 times within its accounting period. Therefore, we can see the inventory turnover in 2020 is higher than 2019. This shows that Selangor Dredging Berhad maximizing their assets effectively in 2020 due to the higher amount of time of inventory turnover compared to 2019. Alright, so now we have average collection periods. So, average collection periods is amounts of days calculated between the credit sales being made and the date of company collects its account receivable within their accounting periods. So, this average collection period ratio can be calculated by account receivables divided with sales times 365. So, from the above figures, in 2019, it shows that Selangor Dredging Berhad collects its account receivable for 86 days after the credit sales was made, while in 2020, the company only takes 65 days to collect its account receivable after the credit sales was made, within their accounting periods. So, here we can see the average collection period in 2020 is lower than 2019. This shows that Selangor Dredging Berhad are more effective than faster in collecting its account receivables on 2020 compared to 2019. Alright, so now we're moving on to the total asset turnover ratio or TATO. So, total asset turnover ratio measure the value of the company's sales and revenue relative to the value of its assets. In other words, it indicates the efficiency of the company in using its overall assets in order to generate revenue. So, the formula of this ratio is sales divided by total assets. So, from the above figures, we can see in 2019 shows that every 1 ringgit of average total assets, the Selangor Dredging Berhad can generate 0.18 of its net sales, while in 2020, the company can only generate 0.17 of its net sales for every 1 ringgit of average total assets. Therefore, we can see the total asset turnover in 2020 is slightly lower than 2019. Unfortunately, it also shows that Selangor Dredging Berhad are not really efficient in managing their total asset turnover, as it's the figure lower than 1 for both financial year. Alright, so last but not least is receivable turnover. It's also known as the debtor turnover. This ratio is measured the number of time over a company accounting period when the company collects its account receivables. So, the formula for this receivable turnover is credit sales divided by account receivables. So, in the above figures, it shows that Selangor Dredging Berhad managed to collect 5.62 times of receivable turnovers in 2020, while Selangor Dredging Berhad only managed to collect 4.24 times of their receivable turnover in 2019. Therefore, we can see Selangor Dredging Berhad receivable turnover in 2020 is higher than 2019. These figures also shows that the Selangor Dredging Berhad collects its receivable turnover better in 2020 compared to 2019. As the higher the figure, it shows that the company has more ability to collect its account receivable from its customer more efficiently. Alright, so finally, we have fixed asset turnover. So fixed asset turnover functioning in measuring how efficient the company utilizes its fixed asset, mainly composed of plant, property, and equipment, in generating their revenue. So the formula of fixed asset turnover is sales divided by fixed assets. Therefore, in the above figures, we can see Selangor Dredging Berhad fixed asset turnover in 2019 shows that every 1 ringgit of fixed asset, the Selangor Dredging Berhad only generates 1.11 ringgit of its net sales, while in 2020, the Selangor Dredging Berhad can only generate 0.95 ringgit of its net sales for every 1 ringgit of its fixed assets. Therefore, we can see that fixed asset turnover of Selangor Dredging Berhad in 2019 is much higher than 2020. Hence, it also shows that 2019, the Selangor Dredging Berhad are more efficient in utilizing their fixed assets in generating their revenue compared to 2020. Thank you, that's all from me. We're moving on to the next presenter.
Assalamualaikum and hi to Safadirul. My name is Nur Fatihah binti Zulkarnain. So right now, I will continue with leverage ratio. Leverage ratio is one of numerous financial metrics that analyzes a company's capacity to satisfy its financial obligations by looking at how much money comes from debt, which is loans. So under this ratio, it has another three, which namely debt ratio, debt to equity ratio, and time interest earned ratio. Okay, now we continue with the first one, which is debt ratio. Debt ratio can be described as to measure the percentage of total funds provided by creditors as compared to funds provided from owner's capital. For further explanation, the debt ratio is a financial metric that determines how much debt a company has. In order to find that ratio, we can divide the total debt with total assets. So according to SDB's debt ratio in 2020, it has only a total ratio of 0.40, while in 2019, SDB has a sum of 0.41 ratio of debt ratio. It demonstrates that SDB has decreased their debt by 0.01 in 2020 as compared to 2019. According to the result above, SDB has lesser debt in 2020 and its total assets able to finance the debt, as the debt is less than 1.0 of total assets. Okay, now we will go to the second leverage ratio, which is debt to equity ratio. Debt to equity ratio is the relative proportion of equity and debt used to finance a firm's asset. The debt to equity or DE ratio is computed by dividing a company's total liabilities by its shareholder equity to determine its financial leverage. So, the DE ratio shows that there is only 0.68 in the year of 2020, while in terms of debt to equity ratio, for 2019, the ratio is 0.70, while STB has declining amount in terms of total debt, which it makes 0.02 in difference from 2019 to 2020. This could mean that STB is now a low risk company since their total debt is lesser than total equity and they finance their investment well. Now, we will move further to the last leverage ratio, which is time interest earn ratio. Time interest earn ratio function is to measure the firm's ability to meet interest payments. The TIE ratio is a measure of a company's capacity to meet debt commitment based on current income. The formula for TIE is earning before interest and tax, which is EBIT, divided with interest expense. As for EBIT, the calculation is gross profit plus with other income minus with administrative expenses minus selling and distribution expenses minus other expenses, and the last one is plus with interest income. As shown in the EBIT for 2020, the result is 18,309. Meanwhile, in the year of 2019 is 48,148. We will continue for the calculation of TIE. From the above mentioned figures, we can see that TIE for 2020 has dropped drastically from the year 2019. As for 2019, STB's TIE has a ratio of 2.59. Nonetheless, STB's TIE for the year 2020 is only 0.94. The huge gap between those 2 years, 2020 and 2019, is up to 1.65 in ratio. Hence, this indicates that in 2020, STB has decreased in TIE and the company has high risk that they put to their investors and creditors as they do not have sufficient EBIT to finance the interest expense.
Assalamualaikum and very good day. My name is Siti Adidania. Now I would like to continue this slide with another element from financial analysis ratio, which is profitability ratio. In the profitability ratio, there are 5 elements that need to be calculated, which is gross profit margin, operating profit margin, net profit margin, return on asset, and return on equity. All these calculations are based on the information that we get from financial statement 2020 and 2019 from Selangor Dredging Berhad. Now, as you can see here, this is the calculations that we made for gross profit margin. As according to the calculation, we can see that the Selangor Dredging Berhad gross profit margin in 2020 is higher than 2019. This has shown that in years' time, the company has higher efficiency of core operation. In other words, this is meaning that the company can still cover operating expenses, fixed costs, dividends, and depreciation while also providing net earning to the business. Now, this is another calculation of element profitability ratio, which is operating profit margin. As according to the calculation, we can see that the Selangor Dredging Berhad's operating profit margin in 2019 is higher with 18.799% than operating profit margin in 2020 with 7.508%. This is mean that the Selangor Dredging Berhad during the year of 2019 are more well equipped to pay for fixed costs and interest on obligation, and also the company will have a better chance to survive during an economic slowdown. Meanwhile, in 2020, they are having a difficulty in generate a profit, and the rate for them to survive through economic downturn is decreased. Now, this is the calculation for net profit margin that we have calculated for Selangor Dredging Berhad. Based on this calculation, the net profit margin for Selangor Dredging Berhad in 2020 is negative 1.836%, which is this figure is lower as compared to the net profit margin in 2019 with 9.533%. The lower ratio as shown in 2020 indicates that the company is not effective in managing its cost, pricing policy, and other non-operating expenses. Now, this is another calculations of another element of profitability ratio, which is return on asset. Based on this calculation, we found that Selangor Dredging Berhad's returns on asset during a year of 2019 is 1.687, which is higher as compared to during a year 2020 with negative 0.319%. However, the lower the profit per ringgit Malaysia of asset, the more asset intensive a company is considered to be. Therefore, it shows that Selangor Dredging Berhad has become more asset intensive in 2020. Now, this is the calculation for the last element of profitability ratio, which is return on equity. The result of this calculation, we found that Selangor Dredging Berhad has decreasing from 2.876% in a year of 2019 to negative 0.535% in a year of 2020 for their return on equity. This has shown that how poor a company's management in employing the shareholders' capital. This is because due to the company with a high return on equity are usually more capable of generating cash internally and therefore less dependent on debt financing.